I must get to the bottom of this.
For 50 years, everyone believed the same story. A respected father, a loving husband, a war hero. His family built their lives around one simple truth. Then a single sentence, spoken by a dying woman, destroyed everything. One forgotten lie exposed a secret that had survived half a century. And by the time the truth emerged, everyone involved was already gone. What was he hiding for 50 years? That question began with a funeral. On a cold autumn afternoon, friends and relatives gathered to say goodbye to Margaret Walker. She had lived a long life. 84 years, 3 children, 6 grandchildren. The kind of woman neighbors described as the heart of the family. As the service ended, people shared stories they had told for decades. Stories about loyalty, sacrifice, love. And at the center of nearly every story was Margaret's husband, Robert. To the outside world, Robert Walker had been everything a man was supposed to be. He served his country, built a successful business, raised a family, never missed church on Sunday. And according to everyone who knew him, he loved Margaret from the moment they met. At least that was the story. The story repeated at anniversaries. The story printed in family albums. The story passed from parents to children and then to grandchildren. A story told so many times that nobody thought to question it. But sometimes the truth survives in unexpected places. Sometimes it waits quietly, patiently, for decades. Then, when the time is right, it finds a way back. As family members gathered after the funeral, conversations drifted from one memory to another. People laughed. Some cried. Others sat quietly, staring into coffee cups while remembering years that would never return. Then an elderly woman named Evelyn spoke. Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper. But what she said would change everything. "You know," she said.
You know, Robert wasn't supposed to marry Margaret.
The room fell silent. Most people smiled politely. Some assumed she was confused. After all, Evelyn was 90 years old. Maybe she had mixed up names. Maybe she was remembering somebody else. But then she repeated it, slowly, carefully, as though she had been carrying the memory for years. "No," she said. Robert was engaged to another woman first. Nobody knew how to respond. The conversation moved on. People changed the subject. Within minutes, everyone was talking about something else. Everyone except one person. Margaret's youngest son, Michael. The comment followed him home. For days he tried to ignore it. It sounded ridiculous. His father had been gone for nearly 20 years. If another woman existed, surely somebody would have known. Surely there would have been photographs, letters, something. Yet the more he thought about it, the more the question bothered him. Who was she? And why had he never heard her name before? Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. A week later, Michael climbed into the attic of the family home. The house was scheduled to be sold. Boxes filled every corner. Old tax records, holiday decorations, photographs nobody had looked at in years. At first, the search felt pointless. Hours passed. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Then, buried beneath a stack of yellowed newspapers, he found a small leather album. Inside were dozens of photographs. Most were familiar. Family vacations, birthday parties, wedding anniversaries. But near the back of the album was a photograph he had never seen before. A young woman stood beside a lake. She appeared to be in her early 20s. She was smiling directly at the camera. And on the back, written in faded blue ink, were 6 words that made Michael stop breathing for a moment. "Forever yours. Love always, Robert." The date beneath the message read 1963. Michael stared at the photograph. His parents had always claimed they met in 1965. That was the beginning of the family story. The date didn't make sense. The woman didn't make sense. Nothing about it made sense. Yet the evidence was sitting in his hands. And for the first time, Michael realized something that had never occurred to him before. Maybe the story he had heard his entire life wasn't the complete story. Maybe it wasn't even close. And the deeper he looked, the more he would discover that one forgotten lie had been hiding a much larger secret all along. Maybe the story he had heard his entire life wasn't the complete story. Maybe it wasn't even close. And the deeper he looked, the more he would discover that one forgotten lie had been hiding a much larger secret all along. The photograph stayed on Michael's mind for days. He showed it to his older sister. She had never seen the woman before. He showed it to cousins, family friends, even distant relatives. The answers were always the same. Nobody recognized her. Nobody knew her name. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere. And yet there she was, preserved inside a family album that had belonged to his parents for decades. The mystery should have ended there. Most people would have accepted that some questions are never answered. Michael couldn't. Something about the photograph felt important. Not because of the woman herself, but because of what it represented. A crack in a story that had always seemed unshakable. So he began doing something nobody else in the family had ever bothered to do. He started checking dates, marriage records, old documents, military papers, employment files, anything connected to his father's early years. At first, the timeline appeared normal. Robert graduated high school, joined the military, returned home, started working, met Margaret, got married. Simple, clean, ordinary. But as Michael compared one record to another, something caught his attention. A gap, a surprisingly large one. Nearly an entire year seemed to be missing. 12 months with almost no photographs. Very few records. Almost no references from friends or family. The period stretched from late 1963 into much of 1964. Michael checked again. Then again. The gap remained. It wasn't proof of anything. People lose records all the time. Photographs disappear. Memories fade. Yet the absence felt strange. Especially for someone like Robert. His father had documented everything. Birthdays, vacations, military service, even routine family gatherings. Yet during this particular period, there was almost nothing. The more Michael looked, the more unusual it seemed. Then he discovered something else. An old address book belonging to Margaret. The pages were worn and fragile. Most names meant nothing. Old neighbors, friends, former co-workers. But one name immediately stood out. Sarah Bennett. The same first name written faintly on the back of the mysterious photograph. Michael froze. For weeks he had been searching for any clue connecting the unknown woman to his family. Now he finally had one. A name. A real name. And unlike the photograph, this wasn't hidden. It had been sitting inside the house all along. He searched public archives, old newspaper databases, county records. Hours turned into days. Days turned into weeks. Then one evening, just as he was about to give up, he found an article. The headline was small, easy to miss, published more than 60 years earlier. It read, "Local woman reported missing." Michael clicked on the article. The photograph beside the story sent a chill through him. It was her, the same woman from the family album, Sarah Bennett. According to the report, Sarah disappeared in the spring of 1964. Friends claimed she had planned to leave town. Others insisted she would never have vanished without telling anyone. Investigators searched for answers. None came. The story slowly disappeared from public attention. Life moved on. The case was eventually forgotten. But Michael couldn't stop staring at one particular detail. Sarah vanished only months before Robert married Margaret. The timing was impossible to ignore. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. For the first time, Michael began asking a question he never imagined he would ask about his own father. What exactly happened between Robert Walker and Sarah Bennett? The answer wasn't waiting in newspaper archives. It wasn't sitting inside public records. It was hidden somewhere much closer, back inside the family home. A few days later, Michael returned to the attic. This time he searched every box, every drawer, every forgotten corner. Hours passed with nothing to show for it. Then, behind an old wooden cabinet, he noticed a small metal lockbox covered in dust. The key was still taped underneath, as though someone had intended to come back for it, but never did. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were military documents, insurance papers, a handful of receipts. Nothing unusual. Then he found an envelope, sealed, yellowed by time. Across the front was written a name. Robert. No last name. Just Robert. Michael carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside had never been mailed. The handwriting belonged to Sarah. And as his eyes moved across the page, he realized this was not an ordinary letter. Every sentence raised more questions than it answered. Every line pointed toward a secret nobody had spoken about in more than half a century. And by the time he reached the final paragraph, Michael understood that everything he believed about his family's history was about to change forever. The letter began simply. Sarah wrote that she had been trying to reach Robert for weeks. She said his phone calls had stopped. His visits had stopped. And every promise he had made seemed to have disappeared with him. As Michael continued reading, The words became harder to process. Sarah wasn't writing to an old friend. She wasn't writing to a casual acquaintance. She was writing to the man she believed she would marry, the man she trusted with her future, the man she believed would stand beside her. Then came the sentence that changed everything. I don't understand why you're pretending I don't exist. Michael read it again, and then again. The next lines were even more unsettling. Sarah wrote that she was pregnant. She wrote that Robert already knew. She wrote that he had promised they would figure things out together. Yet according to the letter, shortly after learning the news, he vanished from her life completely. There was no explanation, no goodbye, no argument, nothing, just silence. Michael sat alone in the attic for nearly an hour. The family story he had heard his entire life was beginning to collapse. His father had never mentioned Sarah, never mentioned a child, never mentioned any of it. Yet here was a letter written in Sarah's own hand describing a future that should have changed everything. The deeper Michael looked, the more impossible it became to dismiss. For weeks he continued investigating. He searched genealogy databases, birth records, public archives. Every trail seemed to end the same way, with more questions. Then, one evening, he found something unexpected. A birth record filed several months after Sarah's disappearance. The mother's name matched. Sarah Bennett. The father's name was left blank. Michael stared at the screen. His heart pounded. If the record was accurate, Sarah had given birth, which meant the story didn't end with her disappearance. It continued. Somewhere. The search intensified. Months passed. Michael followed every lead he could find. Most went nowhere. But eventually one small clue led him to another state. Then another county. Then a family he had never heard of before. A family whose history seemed strangely connected to his own. The final confirmation came through a DNA test. When the results arrived, Michael read them 3 times before he could accept what they were saying. The woman he had been searching for. The woman connected to Sarah. Shared enough DNA to be his half-sister. For more than 50 years, 2 branches of the same family had lived separate lives. They attended different schools, built different careers, raised different children, celebrated different holidays, completely unaware that they shared the same father. Michael eventually met her. Her name was Lisa. She had spent most of her life asking questions about her family history. Questions nobody could answer. Questions her mother avoided. Questions that remained unresolved for decades. Now, sitting across from Michael, she finally understood why. Neither of them spoke much during that first meeting. Neither knew what to say. How do you process a relationship that should have existed your entire life, but was hidden before either of you were born? The answer is that you don't. Not immediately. You simply sit with it and try to understand how a single decision made decades earlier could echo across generations. Still, one question remained unanswered. Why? Why had Robert hidden everything? Why had nobody spoken about Sarah? Why had the truth remained buried for so long? The answer arrived from the one person who had unknowingly started the entire investigation. Evelyn, the elderly woman from the funeral. By now, her health was failing. Michael visited her one final time, and for the first time, she told him everything she remembered. According to Evelyn, people in town knew Robert and Sarah were together. Many believed they would eventually marry. Then one day, Robert began telling people that Sarah had decided to leave, that she wanted a different life, that she was moving away. Most people accepted the explanation. There was no reason not to. In a small town, information traveled quickly, but so did assumptions. Once enough people repeated the story, it became accepted as fact. Nobody questioned it. Nobody investigated further. Years passed, then decades. The explanation survived so long that eventually people stopped remembering where it came from. A single statement became community memory. Community memory became family history. And family history became something nobody thought to challenge. But Evelyn had never forgotten. She remembered the rumors. She remembered the whispers. And she remembered one detail that stayed with her all those years. Margaret knew. Long before the wedding. Long before the children. Long before the life everyone admired. Margaret knew. Michael struggled to believe it. Yet the more evidence he uncovered, the clearer it became. His mother had learned the truth years earlier. She knew Sarah existed. She knew about the child. And despite everything, she chose to stay. Perhaps she believed the past should remain in the past. Perhaps she feared what the truth would do to the family. Or perhaps she simply wanted to protect the life they had built together. Whatever her reasons, she carried that burden for the rest of her life. The realization changed the way Michael viewed both of his parents. Growing up, he had seen people as either heroes or villains, right or wrong, honest or dishonest. The truth was more complicated. Robert was neither the man his family imagined nor the monster some might expect. He was a flawed human being, a man who made choices he could never fully escape, choices that continued shaping lives long after he was gone. And Margaret was not simply a victim of those choices. She was someone who faced a painful truth and spent decades living alongside it. In the end, the greatest surprise wasn't the secret itself. It was how ordinary the beginning had been. There was no elaborate cover-up, no grand conspiracy, no carefully constructed scheme. Just one lie, one explanation, one version of events repeated often enough that nobody questioned it. Until 50 years later, a forgotten comment at a funeral opened a door that had been closed for half a century. A photograph led to a name led to a letter led to a family, and a family led to the truth. By then, the people at the center of the story were gone. The questions they could have answered disappeared with them. But the evidence they left behind told its own story. A story hidden in attics, in old photographs, in fading ink, waiting patiently for someone willing to look. Because sometimes the most powerful secrets aren't hidden by locks or walls. They're hidden by time. And sometimes all it takes to uncover them is one forgotten lie.